Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ike Holter. I'm the director of the Saratoga Springs Public Library, and it is my sincere pleasure to welcome our distinguished panel of guests this afternoon. Mayor Yepsen and our former mayors James Murphy, Raymond Watkin, A.C. Riley, Michael O'Connell, Kenneth Klotz, Michael Lenz, Valerie Keehn, and Scott Johnson. And we have plenty of distinguished guests, including all of you in the audience, so welcome for coming. It really is my pleasure to welcome you today. We anticipate, as we begin to anticipate the centennial of our fair city, and we look forward to a really lively conversation today. To moderate that conversation, we're very pleased to welcome Edward R. Murrow Award winner and international journalism trainer, Dale Willman, who, in addition to being part of teams which won the DuPont Columbia Award and the Peabody Award while working for National Public Radio, Mr. Willman covered the White House, Capitol Hill, the Pentagon, and the State Department for CBS radio stations. And we believe that that mixture of experience is exactly what's required to cover politics in Saratoga. Until recently, Dale was the managing editor of Saratoga Wire, a hyper-local newspaper which he co-founded, which covered the city of Saratoga Springs. Currently, he's a freelancer, and we're very pleased to welcome him here today to introduce our illustrious panel and to moderate what we believe is a historic conversation. So, Dale.
Thank you. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I will say that when we left Washington, we thought that I would get away from politics. Very foolish of me to think that would happen. May I first tell you, for those of you who need a scorecard, these are out there, so you'll be scoring your fight out. But this is the exact seating order that you have up here, and we have many, many years of experience, and I'm very excited about this, and I'm incredibly honored to be a part of this presentation. We have here today 9 distinguished mayors of the city, elder statesmen and women who collectively represent the modern history of Saratoga Springs. And this gives us a unique opportunity to learn and to gain understanding from those who have lived all that is Saratoga today. In order for that to happen, I want to impose one simple ground rule. The focus of this discussion, above all, is not on politics, but rather on Saratoga Springs. So I'd like any comments to be reflective of time in office, rather than criticism of the others gathered here today. And somehow I guess you don't believe that. But we're not here for a debate. There can be disagreement, and I hope there is to some extent, but the focus should be on the city and the experience of all these people in leading that city. As Charles Pickering once said, a healthy democracy requires a decent society. It requires that we are honorable, generous, tolerant, and respectful. Today's conversation is an unusual one. With so many people on the panel, it's going to be difficult to get through everyone with every question. But one thing I would like for this to be is a conversation. So I hope that you'll all feel free to talk to each other and ignore me as much as possible. My goal is not to be heard through this as much as we can. As for my role, I want to quote Will Rogers, who said, "I don't make jokes, I just watch the government and report the facts." So I'll mostly be watching here, and most importantly, my role is to ask questions and sit back and enjoy the conversation with the rest of you. As everyone here likely knows, and as was mentioned, this next year marks the city's centennial, 100 years as a city, so I see this as a wonderful opportunity to informally kick off that season. So with that said, why don't we get started? What I'm not going to do is I'm going to try and save time by going through, by introducing each of you. You have the cards, and let's save that time if we could. And I'm just going to start right into the question, and I'll begin with Mr. Murphy on this end, and we'll work across, and then we'll see what the conversation takes us. So my first news job years ago was in Steubenville, Ohio. And Steubenville is a small hill town, a steel town, sort of a rough and tumble town. And, I reported one day on a city council event, and then did as I often did, which was go to a local bar to have a beer after work and a nice dill pickle. The bar owner also happened to be a city councilman. He didn't like that story. When I walked in that day, he jumped over the bar with a knife and came at me. Now, hopefully none of you have had that kind of experience, but what he points out is the practical challenge of governing in a small town. So, Mr. Murphy, I'd like to start with you. How difficult is it to transition from Main Street, where you see every day those who are affected by your policies, to being mayor of that city. And I'm going to just have you share this word with Mr. Watkin.
Is that working?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, you have to remember this was 1966 and Saratoga was a much smaller place at that time. And literally, you did know when you walked down the street, you almost knew everybody, or they at least knew you. And at the time, I was 28 years old, so it was quite an experience for me. And I really didn't find it difficult to make the transition because I just wanted to do the right thing, and I feel I got in there and did what I could in spite of everything. And as far as politics go, at that time it was nonpartisan. And although I was a registered Republican, the politics really didn't come into the city government. We were left alone.
Mr. Watkin?
Yeah, well, I think he's right, but nonpartisan politics lets your council work together without party bosses and party interference. And for our city, it worked very well. The issues were the important things, not the party. And I think that kind of system is catching on other places. Unfortunately, the League of Women Voters and others thought differently about our city and forced the adopting of partisan politics. I feel it did not help our city. It hurt our city. And they interfered in something that was a tradition and something that was very good. Unfortunately, I tried to stop them, and I did up to the time I was in mayor, and I did stop them from instituting partisan politics.
Okay, I see an agenda starting here. But if we can get back to the question. And tell me just briefly about what it was like making that transition in a small town to hang out and talking to people every day and then suddenly passing legislation that could affect them.
It was a transition, and it was exciting, and we got things done in our council because we made a complete change from the political bosses to the ordinary people, and we changed a lot, and we did a lot. We had a lot of different problems. We had the gas crisis, and we had many other things that happened at the time. So we acted as citizens elected to office, and that's the important thing about this.
I want to point out too that I love they're sort of like the old high school prom pictures, and that, like me, you had more hair back then.
I think I have a lot more now.
So they have a lot more than me. Ms. Riley?
Okay, is this one on? Okay. It was very interesting. I think there is, however, a natural transition, and Ray, of course, was a merchant on Broadway, so he knew a lot of people. And I had been a volunteer in a lot of different places. So while I also wasn't exactly aged at the time, I knew a lot of people through my volunteer work. And the thing that happened to me was I was raised by my mother to always say, oh, I couldn't do that, you know, I need a committee and all of that. Pretty soon you're in charge. And I remember crossing the street, and there had been a huge cave-in in front of Adirondack Trust very early in my term. It was the middle of winter, and they had a water line leak or something. And I'm walking across the street, carefully, not looking, because I was raised not to run to see fires and accidents. I didn't go unless I was in charge, and I go, oh, that's my hole in the ground. So I went over, and the public works employees said, oh, hello, and they told me all about it. And it was a very interesting learning experience to say, oh, I am supposed to want to know what's going on. And so while I had a lot of experience over time, learning that you are supposed to put your finger in, and if you go to a neighborhood association, you want to know what they think. And that part was a bit of a transition, but it sure was a lot of fun.
Well, I'm a Republican. And I never had that advantage of talking about being nonpartisan, that type of thing. And again, I'm not pointing a finger at being nonpartisan, but having grown up at a time when there were Republicans and Democrats, I kind of thought that should fit into the local situation also, and I was very comfortable designating myself as a Republican. But I think one of the great things about Saratoga is, though, that you can still communicate with others, even if from the other party. And I always found that to be a part of when I was in office, that if you sat down and really started talking with one another, you could really work a lot of things out. And the Democrat and Republican kind of faded out. I remember many times with Commissioner McTighe. He was a Democrat on the council when I was there, and when I had a problem, or he had a problem, I said, let's sit down and talk about it. Well, usually the conversation went on for at least a half an hour with Tommy waving his hands and giving his expressions and everything else, but we finally were able to say, let's work out an understanding, and then we'll vote this way. And that's how we work things out, too. So I think even nonpartisan can be great, but I think partisanship is also very good, too. But Tommy, one time, we cut a deal, and I called the council into session and everything, and we got to the issue, and Tommy assured me beforehand I had his vote the way the thing was laid out, but he all of a sudden said he wanted to make a speech, and I thought, uh-oh. Up he stood, and he started to go. And I said, which way is he going with this thing now? And all of a sudden he lost his voice. So I immediately called for a vote. A quick second, we got the vote. He says, I'm not done. I said, oh, no, we already voted on that. But he wanted to meet with me afterwards. I won't get into the conversation. But again, that's some of the experiences I had.
Dale, I didn't find the transition to be particularly difficult. I think if you're running for this office, you already know quite a few people in town. And I always found going around to different organizations and certainly doing door-to-door, I think everybody's had this experience. People in the community were friendly, they were welcoming, they appreciated the fact that you were coming there. This is not a huge community, and it's actually a city where when you're running for citywide office, you can aspire to talk to, if not absolutely every last person, at least most people, and knock on their doors and meet them if you don't know them before, renew your acquaintance if that's what you're doing. And I was very comfortable going into the mayor's office, knowing the people that I knew, and I think people were comfortable with that relationship. I can remember early on in my first term, there was a power outage, and I got a call from a neighbor in Geyser Crest, and he said, you know, it's getting cold here, and my mother-in-law is with us visiting, and I don't know really what's going on here. What are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't think you want me coming over tinkering with your electrical system there. And I told them what to do if there was an emergency. You could get to the hospital, and that NIMO was working on it. But yeah, people in this community are good, and they're reasonable, and they want to work with you.
So what I'm hearing so far is transition is easy, that in a small town that doesn't create problems. And instead, it creates value because you get instant feedback. You talk to people, you hear, you discuss, you have conversations about it, right? So now we're moving into this millennium with Ken on the mic. So does that track with?
Yeah, well, I have a couple of opinions or observations. I know when I took office, I was 39 when I got elected to office, and I thought I was the youngest mayor until somebody told me that Jim Murphy was 28. And that's pretty amazing that he was 28 years old and served as mayor of this community. And I also have a very fond memory of my father. We owned the building where our pharmacy is located on the corner of Broadway and Lake Avenue. For years, one of our tenants was Ray Watkin, who owned a business right next door. And I would spend a lot of my childhood years in the pharmacy, obviously growing up there, and I would see Ray out literally on the street corner, engaging in street corner politics, which was a perfect blend between a businessman and the mayor of our city. He would literally stand on the corner and talk to people as they came by about whatever issues he was talking about. And I really admire that about him, and it was really kind of something that I tended to model myself after when I chose to run for office, because I knew when I went to I remember talking to my father about when I said I'm going to run for office, because I served as finance commissioner before serving as mayor, as some other members of the panel have as well. But he said, I have one question for you, and curiously, he didn't say, have you thought about what impact it would have on the business? He said, as a father would to his son, are you prepared to lose? He was only concerned about whether or not I could handle it if I didn't win. And I thought that was a really nice, observation for my dad, or advice for my dad to give me. But, transitioning over was kind of nice, because it's kind of nice to have your part-time job right across the street from your full-time job. Many times I'd be running right across the street 5 minutes before we had to open up the pharmacy. But there were some challenges. I think that there are people who, anytime you own a business, there may be people that might not come to you because for a particular reason that might be related to politics. I'll never know that, but I think probably that would happen. So I think the transition as a businessman, especially a small business owner, can sometimes be challenging. I did have a situation where we had to, as finance commissioner, propose the idea of raising the copay for City Hall employees. I hesitate to say this, $5. And there was outcry. And the fire department, actually, members of the fire department, almost considered picketing out front of my pharmacy, which I thought really would have crossed the line. Fortunately, they didn't do it. So it does come into play, unfortunately, and I think that transition for me as a small business owner helped me, because I understood what was going on downtown. I had my finger on the pulse of our downtown community, but I think in some cases it could have been somewhat of an hindrance as well.
Did anybody come in at any point and say, I'm not coming here anymore because you voted on X or Y? Over the years, and I can count it on one hand, there have been people that have come in and have said things, that there was a mail piece that I sent out that they didn't like. They might have brought the mail piece in and said, I didn't like this, and that happens. I mean, and again, all of us, when we put ourselves out there before the community, we put ourselves out there as a complete person. So none of us are career politicians. We all had other things that we did with our lives, and those things ultimately are going to be part of who we are. So I wasn't really upset about it, but at the same time, from a business point of view, you do understand that it might have an impact on the business, and you take that into consideration. As a son of a pharmacist, I know how difficult and how much work it is behind the counter.
And it's almost like being a bartender, because you're stuck. People come in and talk to you about their opinions.
Well, that's so being retail like that, did you find it affecting your work in a negative way by spending so much time having to discuss or defend your policies?
Yes. Yeah, there's no question that it took its toll on my ability to run my business effectively. And as I said, you are kind of, you're stuck. So if somebody comes in, whether they agree with you or disagree with you and want to lobby you on a position, you're kind of, it's very difficult to get away from them. And I don't know if Ray probably experienced that to some extent, that you can't get away. So.
If someone who had a retail business in town came to you and said they wanted to run for office today, what would you tell them? Oh,
I would tell them if they felt compelled to serve in public office, no matter what they were doing, to do it. I mean, Matt McCabe, as similar to me, owned a business on Broadway and came forward and ran for finance commissioner at a time when I was serving in office. So he and I did have that discussion, and I did tell him what I thought were some of the pros and cons of what it means to be a business owner as well as serving as a politician. I think if you go into it with your eyes open, as Ken said, this is a fairly small community. We all tend to know one another. We don't always agree all the time. But I think that I wouldn't tell anybody to preclude themselves from seeking public office because they own a business, if they really felt compelled.
So Valerie, how about your experience?
Well, unlike probably everybody else here, the transition for me was mortifying. I mean, I was a mother of 3 sons. I was a special ed teacher. I had not lived in Saratoga for generations. I had come here and lived here for about 12 years before moving here from New York City, but actually I was from Wyoming, so I grew up in a small town in Wyoming, lived there most of my adult life, all my childhood. So I just remember waking up the day after the election and looking at my husband and saying, oh my God, what did we do? But, you know, I felt that the people that supported me had a real positive agenda for the city, and I did feel like I knew where I wanted to go, and I had a lot of support, and it was because of all those people that supported me that I think I was able to move along with the clear-cut idea of, you know, what people were hoping for the future of the city, what they wanted to see maintained in the city. I can remember the first time that my husband and I drove into Saratoga Springs with a little U-Haul on the back of our car. I'd never been here before. He was getting a job with the state, and people that he had talked to had said, well, if you're going to move to upstate New York and your husband's going to work in Albany, the only place you want to live is Saratoga Springs. So we came up here. I had never been here. He had only visited a few times. And I was totally enamored. It was quaint, it was small, it was charming, it was artsy. I thought, oh wow, there's going to be a lot of, like, you know, hippies living here. This is great. So, you know, I lived the first 10 years of my life learning and knowing Saratoga through other mothers that had children in elementary school, and teachers, and coming to the library and learning about the library, you know, trying to figure out different things that we could do with our children in the community, getting involved in baseball and all of the different sports things that were available to my kids. So even though it was a terrifying experience at the beginning, and you know, I couldn't imagine what I was thinking when I agreed to do it, it really was, it was a part of my life that I won't ever forget. It was a little bit of a blip in my life, and probably somewhat of an anomaly when you look at politics in Saratoga Springs. But I think there were lots of things happening nationally, and I was kind of riding the tails of some things that were going on nationally that I think probably helped locally as far as my election. So.
And I would add that I woke up the next morning after the election, I did not have the same reaction.
I wanted to just call you up and say, you know, I'm giving it back to you. Forget about it.
I'm not sure that I would have done.
First of all, thank you, Dale, and all of you here today for showing up. So we live in Saratoga Springs, we live in community involvement, and this really fits into what we were talking about earlier question, Dale, in terms of interacting with people in the community and how that works as being an incumbent mayor. And I can tell you right now, it affects you every day throughout most of your waking hours. And by that I mean what used to be a 5-minute walk is now a 20-minute walk down Broadway and around town. Everyone wants to have a piece of you, to float something by you, to get a reaction, try to influence you on a given issue. That's part of being mayor, part of being on the city council. And you go into that through eyes wide open. That is part of your job, and you openly accept it, or you don't run for re-election.
And yet you kept coming back.
Yes, I did, and I'm glad I did. I grew up in the city, raised my family here. My wife Julie and I had a lot of connections and roots in our city. That helped us with the transition, if you will, going from just a citizen to be an elected official, particularly the mayor of our city. We already knew a lot of people in the community. We were very involved, both personally and professionally in the community. So all that does help. And going back to what Mayor Keehn mentioned, it must have been very difficult coming into a city like ours that has a lot of history. A lot of people live here for a long number of years, and not having that as your background to have to interact with what happens in our city. Our city's changed a lot over the last 10, 12 years. There's a demographic I find interesting. And it was true as of like 2 years ago at least, almost 40% of our population has lived here 10 years or less. So our city is a very changing city from what used to be the old Saratoga. And we all know that because we're very involved, and as the mayor, you need to know that and act on that way, act on that. And make sure that you reach out to all people in the community. And that's really crucial, as I see it, being the mayor. You have to be open to everybody. I may not agree with them on the issues, but you need to be open for the dialogue and to allow them to try to influence you on an issue. So that having been said, and everybody spoke way too long, I'm a man of few words than my former mayors, and that's how I see it in our city. I wouldn't have traded one thing for it ever to go back and not do this. I would say it's harder on our spouses than us oftentimes because the demands on them, having us around the house fewer hours, not able to attend all family functions, plus just the demands of going out in the community as much as you need to be out there as the city mayor. The events you must go to, you want to go to some of them, not all of them, but you go to all of them because that's your job. And for our spouses, it's not easy to accept that role because we're the elected official. They support us, thank God. Couldn't do it without their support, but certainly it's a direct and dynamic impact on your day-to-day feeling life.
Joanne, I suspect this is a different question for you because you were in politics for a long time before you came to mayor, but I'm curious as to your transition as well.
Well, I didn't just wake up one morning and say, I think I'll run for office. I do know that some people do that. That wasn't the case with me. I never imagined that I would run for office, but I followed my passions and my connections, and when I was employed at Skidmore College for 17 years, I was very involved in the community through my job. I started getting on different boards and committees and chairing different boards of directors, and then got involved certainly with all my kids' activities and got to know a lot of people. So when I was asked to first run for office in 2005, I hesitated only because of what some people have mentioned here today. How does it affect your family, number one? And number two, how does it affect your business? I had then left Skidmore and started my own consulting business with nonprofits. And I was concerned about, now that we have partisan politics, how is this going to affect potential clients and board of directors that I work with? In fact, the actual opposite happened. The business started flourishing more, and I did choose to run for office. And I served 4 terms on the County Board of Supervisors representing this great city. So that was a clear, wonderful history for me to have the experience to run for mayor. I was familiar with the issues. I already knew a lot of people and had a good handle on what my vision would be and how I would like to move this city forward. So for me, the transition was fairly smooth and one that I welcomed with open arms. It was difficult to go into a more administrative position as opposed to a county supervisor, but I'm adjusting myself well and thank God my kids are older. Wouldn't want to do this if I had 3 little kids at home, but they're all out of the house now and working successfully and going to college, and everybody's doing great. So now people say, is this a part-time job or a full-time job? I said, it's a lifestyle.
All right, I have a lot of questions, but I want to pick up on some of what's been said here. Valerie, I appreciate coming into town as a newcomer. I've been here 14 years, and for most of you, you look at me like an interloper. For me, I feel like an old timer with many people I talk to here. That 40% number is probably higher than that now. It has changed drastically. So I'm curious about how you see how governance has changed in Saratoga over, say, the past, well, since the 60s. How has governance changed? And I want to start at this end and work back, because then we'll have that more distant sort of elder statesman view that I think can add a lot to this as well. That doesn't mean old, just elder statesman.
So I'm probably not the best one to answer this question. I have to say how honored I am here to be with everyone. I have called many of you and met with many of you to sought advice. In fact, Mayor Riley Dake was very much followed the same path I did. She served on the Board of Supervisors, she chaired the Board of Supervisors, and then ran for mayor. And actually, can I tell them that we actually have the same birthday in November too? So we became fast friends quickly, and I've relied on many of you for advice and ideas and governance suggestions over the years, and I want to thank you all.
What were you telling him? What kind of advice were you getting?
Oh, well, I'm not going to share that, no. No, but I do want to say that everyone on this panel is also going to be invited. The Centennial is shaping up so beautifully. We're going to have a great year in 2015. Lots of activities are planned. April 7th in 2015 is the actual 100th anniversary of being incorporated as a city. We're going to do a reenactment on the City Hall steps, and I want you all there. So it's going to be a very exciting year.
A reenactment of what?
Of the incorporation of the city. We'll all have to wear the long curly wigs, but the governance, look, this role that we have as mayors is very unique. And I'm constantly reminding everyone in New York State that this is very different than most cities in the state. I've built a very wonderful coalition with levels of government to ensure that our city is well represented, both in Washington, Albany, and at the county. And the coalition of Capital District mayors and I are working really well together. We have already put together summits on housing issues, and we're going to continue to work on issues that affect the region together. We talk all the time, and they're running the police department, the fire departments. It's a very different kind of form of government. I don't see our government or our governance having changed very much over the last several years. Several times, the various public, we've all been invited to vote on charter changes and a change of form of government, and it's been denied. So I think that the role the mayor plays here in the city is unique, and there's pros and cons, clearly.
So let me throw another element into that then. So let's talk about the change of governance, and as part of that, recognize what's happened since in the 14 years I've been here, which is Saratoga's demographically changed drastically. It's a wealthy community, it's a more expensive place to live, and that changes who can afford to live here, and that also changes, I would suspect, demands on government. So if you could add that into it. So talking about the change over the years in governance with that factor thrown into it.
How long do we have?
In 1 minute.
2 minutes of public comment, at least. That's 58 seconds. But anyway, the original question, how has it changed over the years? I think Valerie Yepsen hit the nail on the head to a large degree, and that is, with our form of government, it really hasn't changed all that much in terms of the day-to-day operation of our city and how it works. It's different than most cities. However, kind of an overlay to any form of government, including ours, of course, is nationally what's happening. What people expect from their elected officials today as opposed to years ago. Your personal life is not your personal life, and never really was to begin with. But in the post-Watergate era, that certainly changed dramatically in terms of how people viewed elected officials, what they expected from them, and the scrutiny that you're put to on almost a day-to-day basis, including family life. I have nothing to hide. It's just, that's a reality. You're out there 24/7 in the public, and it's increasingly a demand, I think, on any elected official today, more so than ever before. With that being said, also what people expect in terms of the public involvement in their local community, their local government. And that's all a good thing, but it's different than what it was many years ago. We hear words all the time, almost daily now, transparency and open government. Those are great concepts and great practices, and those always should have been there. But I can unequivocally state, I believe, that the level of transparency and open government is on an all-time high. only because people are demanding it and they're being vigilant and making sure that you deliver what they want. So that being said, there's a different landscape today than ever before. That's a good thing. I'm not criticizing those that came before me. They all did fine jobs. It's just a different reality to be the mayor of our city that is such a changing city also. Demographically, the prominence our city now enjoys on so many levels, not just in the capital region, but across the country.
And this is good, but how does this play out in a practical sense? I mean, I agree with that, but in a more practical sense in governance, what does that mean to you in office?
It just means you have to make yourself more available to anybody who wants to talk about any issue. And that expanding on that a little bit, there are more issues today that you have to deal with. Different people, different viewpoints. That is different than what it was perhaps back in the 60s and the 70s, even into the 80s. And you also, you have the economic issues that really loomed over our city and the world beginning in 2008 with the whole crash of the market and so on and so forth. That has added a whole different demographic and demand, I think, on what it is to be a city mayor in a community as prosperous as ours. But we're not immune to problems happening around the world. We weather them better than anybody else, I believe, because we're a strong community, very involved, talented people who live here and believe in defending and improving a way of life. But certainly it is a fact that you have to deal with today, and it's more so than ever.
I know one thing that happened that really, I think, changed some of the demographics and dynamics in Saratoga Springs was 9/11. Because what I heard a lot from people when I was running is that they had moved to Saratoga Springs because they wanted to get out of the city. Because the devastation had absolutely changed their way of life and thinking how they wanted to live their life. And so there were people that were moving in droves out of New York City, and they wanted to find a place where they could safely raise their children, where they could get away from, you know, the horrifying memories and experience that they had. And so I spoke directly with people who had done exactly that. They'd moved to Saratoga Springs because they wanted to have a better life for themselves, for their children, and so I think that people were looking for a small town. They were looking for some place that was safe. They were looking for some place where there were arts and culture and lots of places to dine out and all the things that they had in the city, minus all the negatives. And so I do think there were some expectations on the part of people who had all of those things coming to a small town. They in fact wanted to keep it a small town. They didn't want to see it growing up around them as they had experienced in the city, and they wanted to keep it at that small, quaint town. That's why they moved here. So I think there were some dynamics with people that were moving into the city that changed the way that I, as an official in the city, looked at legislation. And in fact, many of those people were people, I think, that supported me because they did want to keep the city separate from encroaching communities. They did want to keep that green space. They valued Saratoga being an entity in and of itself and not the sprawl that they were experiencing coming from upstate or from communities that were growing from New York City. So there was a lot of that sort of influence on things that I would do as the mayor and ways that I would vote. So that had a lot of influence and impact on me, and I also supported that. That was one of my first impressions of Saratoga Springs, is that you knew when you were in the city and you knew when you left the city. Any space around the city was clearly defined, and I loved that about it. I had lived in Oklahoma City for 4 years before coming here, and Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and there are so many of those huge mega cities that you don't know from one place to the next where you actually are. So that, I think, is one thing that's very unique about it. Not just Saratoga Springs, but a lot of places in upstate New York.
A lot of those tornadoes too.
There's a lot of tornadoes.
Mike, if you could, as a local boy, as many of you are, local kids in town, you've seen a lot of changes in your lifetime. How did that affect, what did it do with governance when you took office?
Well, I got several thoughts, but I think Valerie's point is well taken, and I think the city as a whole has done an incredibly remarkable job, and I speak more to the citizenry, leading the elected officials, if you will, in creating that what we constantly hear, the city and the country concept. That's almost been an undeniable, unshakable fabric of our community, and it's existed through multiple mayors and administrations, and that's only because the community has really demanded it. And so I agree completely with Valerie's assessment of that dynamic within our community, and it is, in fact, what makes this community what it is. I want to answer your question, but I just want to touch on the form of government because I think it's important. When I came into office, and I served 6 years as finance commissioner before serving as mayor, one of the things I learned early on, and it was from Mayor O'Connell, was that you can't get anything accomplished at that table without 3 votes. And it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat or conservative or independent, you can't get anything done without 3 votes. And that form of government really created the necessity to work together collaboratively and oftentimes across party lines to get anything done. And it's difficult when that doesn't happen. And we've all been in those situations where we wanted to get something done, but we couldn't because we couldn't get that cooperation from at least 2 other people. So the form of government is important because, we all serve as part-time administrators and elected officials. As finance commissioner, you were responsible for the fiscal health of the city. As mayor, I noticed a completely different perspective, and it changed very quickly for me, is that in Saratoga Springs, as the mayor, your power is 1 vote out of 5. Your perception is that you are the leader of the city, and in fact a strong mayor, and when somebody has a pothole, as Mayor Riley said, that's your problem. They're going to call the Commissioner of Public Works, but they're also going to call the mayor, right? So every issue that is specific to a department is going to come to your desk eventually, or your phone, or your email. And I think everybody here would agree with me. So that's was a unique dynamic for me as I transitioned to the role of mayor. I couldn't say, I did say you need to call Commissioner McKay, but that wasn't a good enough answer. That you're the mayor. You call Commissioner McKay, you take care of it. So there is a responsibility whether you want it or not as mayor. So I think that form of government and that transition was unique for me, and I think the whole form of government is unique for this community. And I guess in my opinion, I think that it served the community well. We all, obviously there are people that might think we need to change it, but I guess I've been of the opinion that I think it served us well. There have been a lot of changes since as a young boy growing up, and I harken back to my comment about Mayor Watkin. I think it was a simpler time then, and that doesn't mean that it was easier to be mayor, but it was a simpler time in the sense that there were less of these issues that Mayor Johnson alluded to that were encroaching upon us from the national level on down. I sense, and they'll refute this or agree with me, that it was a lot more focus on simply local issues, and I think that we were all dealing with, a lot of us in more of the, shall I say, modern era, are dealing with a lot of issues that were coming down from the national level and trickling on down. And that's not to say that didn't happen when I was younger, but I think that definitely has been a change in how things have occurred.
Might I jump in as an elder statesman?
Well, I want to hold you two for last because I have a lot of...
He wants to make a comment on what he said.
Okay, but I want to add more to this when we come to you. I've got a lot of good stuff.
I just want to say that I think Mayor Johnson's point that we're operating under the same charter now that we did then, and I think that naturally with more people there are more problems, but the problems that existed in our early years were just as important to the people that lived here then, and we had to deal with them, and we had the same structure to do it.
And I want to, that's exactly what I want to come to. So can you hold off on that if you would? Because that's exactly what I want to come to. No, this is very important.
And I think to a certain extent it might have been harder for them to deal with it.
Well, and I think an argument could be made for that. So I was going to surprise with that, but now...
Sorry. I can moderate if you want.
For an elected official, in the most generic sense, there are two main things that you need to do. You need to be responsive to your constituency. People elect you because they have certain expectations, and then they have expectations when you're in office. But you also need to have a vision. You need to have a sense of where you're headed. And to some degree, always you're reacting to what people want you to do. And Mike was quite right about the city and the country concept and the insistence of this community on that. But there's also an educating function when people don't understand an issue in great detail. You have to be on top of it and ahead of them sometimes and be able to explain to them while you're listening and while you're getting their sense of what they want. You have to be able to explain to them what the issues are and what you're thinking about as you listen to them. Now, this is really an unusual community. It's unusual in the percentage of people who are interested in the governance of the community, who have strong feelings about issues, and whatever the issue is, there are always people out there on opposite sides of it that have a lot to say about it. And I think that's great. I think if you look at all of the organizations and the strong individuals and people who have opinions and have ideas about the direction the community needs to go in, to some extent the elected official is just overseeing that process and to some degree shaping it, but also responding to it. But I would say, whether it's the 1960s or the 1990s or the current era, an elected official has to be responsive to the community, has to understand what the issues are, and has to figure out a way to respond to them that is both consistent with his or her overall vision of what's good for the community and reflects what people want. And to that degree, it's really no different in this generation than it has been in the past.
And that's a real conflict, isn't it? You know, people elect you for a vision, for this broader view that you have, but when it comes down to it, you're not getting that pothole. So there's a conflict between those two things.
But you have to figure out how to negotiate that conflict, yeah.
You bring up the term community, and it's important. But when I was in office, we were kind of at the end of an era where the city of Saratoga Springs had a lot of communities. We had the east side, we had the west side, and there were different perspectives out there in the community as to what was needed, what was necessary, even where we should be going. And times changed fairly rapidly after I left office, but I caught kind of the tail end of that era that I walked Broadway, like others did, but I also went to the other neighborhoods and talked to the community organizations out there, that type of thing, because you needed to get feedback as to what was the beliefs out there, what were their concerns, and what directions did they want to go in. But every community evolves, but I think that the magic that we all had here is the commission form of government. It works here. It's perfect for a community like the city of Saratoga, and I think that's something that a lot of other places could perhaps take a look at. even though they've often told us you ought to get rid of that form of government. I know when I was mayor, I dealt a lot with the people in Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. They used to laugh at me about, that's a kind of a crazy thing. But then they say, but why are you making out so well up there? Why are you making out so well?
And I'll point out that the vote is over on the charter change. So I think we can pass on that now. But let me see if you would, please.
I can follow up on that. Because I served on a charter revision commission in 1968. I was appointed by Mayor Murphy. And that actually is how I got interested in local government. But I have been an advocate for change. I think there are things about it that would be very beneficial. However, I have come to realize, particularly through working with it, that the commission system is predicated on people of goodwill working together, deciding what the issues are, and then figuring out what to do about them. And the members of the city council each have a function. When I was there, Mike was the Commissioner of Finance. As he says, we couldn't have done anything unless we could find the money. Why don't you go see Mike? Maybe he can find the money. There are other, if you wanted something to happen in the city regarding the physical plan, you had to talk to Commissioner McTime. And you could work together and find out how all of the parts, it's sort of biblical, the hand doesn't know what the foot's doing. But it works. And I think there could be efficiencies. It'll come up again, maybe. But the change that I have seen, like when we were doing land use planning when I was in City Hall, and I didn't know about it before, there was some resistance to building apartments. Why do we want apartments here? Everybody should have their own home. Everybody has a vision of a lawn, that kind of thing. And at the time, when somebody would recommend an apartment, people say, oh, no, we don't want to do that. And look what's happening today. It's really different. But I think people's lives have changed, and it's similar to what some other people have referred to. The two-income family, people who would rather do something else besides mow the lawn. But those things have evolved. And someone else mentioned the relative wealth of the community. And I would say to you that we had poverty and we had disenfranchised people when I was in office, and we have them now. And you'll remember from last winter when there was a movement to help homeless people. That is something we didn't talk about. They were here. And when they discovered that homeless people were sleeping under the parking lot next to Lillian's, somebody figured out where they could go, and SOS was born. But the other thing that happened was Travelers Aid was involved, and they would get them to Albany where there was another kind of shelter. There is poverty here. I'm working today with the OC, and we are working, you have to deal with the needs of all levels of people. And my mantra when I was in City Hall, we had occasionally groups of people, the City Hall chamber would be just loud. And I know now sometimes they overflow into the hall. You have to remember that even if there are 100 people that are coming to say they don't want something, or they do want something, there are 25 or 28,000 people who are not there, who may not agree with that point of view. And you've got to consider everybody. You need to do your own homework if you're going to sit in the seat. And you need to think. And as someone, Ken, I think, said, you have to lead occasionally. You have to not just vote yes because there are 50 or 100 people in the room that want you to. And it's not a sin to be the lone negative voter, because any person who runs for office has been elected to serve the people that elected them. And yes, you reflect their opinion, but there are 9 opinions, and you can't represent them all. So you do your best.
Great. Now, this is the moment I've been waiting for. What I heard with the youngsters up here is that life was simpler when you were mayor. That history books, of course, were a lot smaller. We did math on our fingers. Hollywood was just that fantasy at that point. The 70s, the 60s, 70s were a very difficult time for upstate New York. You drive along the Mohawk Valley and go to many communities there, and you see this from town to town to town. Saratoga, as a newcomer, my understanding was, at that point, Saratoga was on the cusp and faced the potential of becoming yet another one of those tired, worn towns that once had a beautiful past that no longer exist to many people. So I think an argument can be made that you had perhaps even bigger challenges back then because you were recreating a town. So that's what I wanted to get at. If you could talk a bit.
Well, I'd like to say a couple things. Number one, that in 1973, I got elected. Well, I have to put it in my mouth.
No, no.
Please don't.
Are you going to run it, or am I going to run it? We're busy. Listen, all I can say is that in 1973, we were elected against the establishment of people that were in office for a couple of terms, that were long-term residents of the city, had ideas about this city, and the city was in really bad shape. We had a fire, we had a lot of empty stores on Broadway. Our racing situation was precarious because there were proposals to take away our 24 days of exclusive racing. And that would have been a disaster.
Meaning longer, more days, or gone?
Exclusive racing was important to us.
And if I can ask, if you would have the mic a little closer, because
we were in trouble, and we had to do something about it. And I did something about it with the governor. He gave us the assurance that we have our 24 days of exclusive racing. Howard Samuels was a candidate against Kerry at the time, and his main mantra was off-track betting and non-exclusive racing. And we wanted to fight that, and I personally, as mayor, supported that position with Governor Kerry, who became governor during my tenure. And we did have many other problems. We had a gas crisis in my early years where we did not have gasoline for the city and the commuters to go to Albany and work, which was very important. So I instituted an odd-even system in the city, which helped alleviate the problem, and I was able to get more gasoline for the city. The action, this was not a sleepy time for the city. It was a very crucial time for the city of Saratoga Springs, and there was a lot of work. I actually quit my job and worked full-time during my tenure as mayor in order to do some of these things. And I believe that we accomplished things that helped us people. The community development plan, which we did a facade easement program, which helped do the buildings, historic buildings in the city. We built many buildings, and we did a lot of rehabilitation of housing, Section 8 housing for people that couldn't afford to live in the city at the time. So there were a lot of accomplishments here. It sounds like we had a sleepy town, nothing to do. It was just so wonderful. We lowered taxes 5 years in a row and increased services. We brought $7 to $8 million worth of community development funds into this city. We rehabilitated the casino. We did many things. We built a fire station. We built a senior citizen center. It sounds like we were just sleeping Rip Van Winkle. The sidewalk cafe proposals in. We tried to do some things that would help people make a living, and I think that we accomplished a lot during that period. It wasn't easy. I had no deputy. I had to give up my job and work full time in the city, which I did. And I was making $2,500 a year. And there were plenty of problems, and I tackled them. And the city council tackled them with me. We had nonpartisan government. We wanted to work together for the city. Republicans, Democrats, independents, whoever were there, we had a patriotic feeling about the city of Saratoga Springs, and it worked well, and we have the accomplishment to show for them.
I told you you'd get your chance.
But if I could just add something before we went to Mayor Murphy, is that I remember as a child, my dad coming home, it was back when the Pyramid Mall was built out at Exit 15, and there was a lower sales tax out there, and he said that if this continues, we may have to close the pharmacy. I can remember those days where my father was stressed out about what the condition of downtown Saratoga Springs. I'm really glad you brought that up, because it is mayors like Mayor Watkin and Mayor Jones and Mayor Murphy before them. When faced with that, I think this community really did. You're absolutely correct. They were on the cusp. They really were on the cusp. And I think we could have gone in several different directions. Special assessment district, Ray, that you created, I think is something that people need to understand. He's the mayor that created the special assessment district that essentially bonded the downtown businesses together to invest in themselves. And
So they paid extra money.
correct,
It was
correct.
invested.
Yeah, and the facade easements, and again, Mayor Watkin can speak to this, but I just know from experience that, you know, the getting together to improve the facades of the buildings and really focus on our downtown. And so the downtown that we see, that has been created, the genesis of that was in the days when those simple folks were mayor. And what they did was really lay the groundwork for what we have today. I think they deserve a lot of credit.
And that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make, is you can see even cities that have come back from urban renewal. In fact, you see a lot of cities, Washington, D.C., a lot of major cities that knocked everything down in the 70s, built these monstrosities, these horrible things, and now they're reinventing themselves and getting rid of those.
I forgot to mention one point. We did the Village Brook project, which nobody sees, but the city was flooded. And we spent millions and millions of dollars underground during my administration, during the area where we got those funds from the federal housing group, and we did those flood plains, and they worked out very well for the city. We have no flooding now at the casino. We have no flooding in the areas of Caroline Street and other places. It was terrible. It was really terrible.
Right, so the youngsters down there are all surprised you guys aren't off at nap time right now. So what did you guys do?
The first thing I did back then was get rid of the parking meters off Broadway. And try to rejuvenate downtown. And just an interesting story about Ray's money for the sewer. When I was on, we had a public works commissioner at that time who, when he was told about that problem, said, let people get a boat. That's the kind of person. So the votes in relation to public works were 4-1. He was always voting against things for his own department. It was ridiculous. Going to that particular time, in 1966, the Congress passed the first law pertaining to architectural for historic buildings. And I immediately put it in Saratoga. I think we were one of the first cities in the state, maybe even the country, to have what is now your design review committee, because we realized the importance of keeping the historic avenue of Saratoga alive. And to make the city grow, I created a lot of enemies when I annexed part of the town of Greenfield to put the Skidmore campus. And some years later, it came back to bite me because I wanted to become town attorney for Greenfield, and the vote was 3-2. That's the SOB who took the land from 10 years ago. But we all know what Skidmore has done for the community, and in a way things were easier. In a way, I think the mayor is the titular head when you read the charter, so the mayor could get away with a lot of things sometimes. They just do them. And I happened to look through a scrapbook that my wife had, and I came across an article that says, Mayor directs Public Safety Commissioner not to issue building permit to McDonald's. I just did it. And I said, because that was the day of the golden arches, the big ones. And I said, your golden arches, I'm saying is a sign, you're violating the sign ordinance, you can't build. And I had a visit from some officials at McDonald's, and they said, we won't build. I said, fine. Well, they built, and the arches were very small. First city in the country without the giant golden arch. So there were, not that it was easier, there were just different issues. And you dealt with them as they came up. And you tried to be proactive. The new high school was built during the time I was there. And I created a lot of friends. I came across in the charter that I could force the people that own the land put sidewalks in. So the sidewalk on the south side of West Circular Street, I forced everybody to put in. If they didn't put it in, Public Works went and put it in and back charged it on their tax. But I think, you know, I happened to go that way and see all these kids in the road. I thought, this is crazy. So we all, every one of us, has to deal with the times that we're in. And I don't think it's easier now, harder then. I think everyone has dealt with what they have and the best of their ability, as AC said.
I was having a lot of fun with this, but I think that is the point, that each successive office has its own particular challenges. Let me point out that there is a bottle of water for each of you. I'm going to give you 2 hours and it's warm in here, so if you need something to drink, you do have, well, not anymore, 45 minutes. It's gone so well. So now we're out of the initial rounds, we go into the bonus rounds. I hope you're keeping track of your scorecards. In the bonus rounds, simply with these questions, I don't think we need to go in order anymore. I think let's have a nice conversation. The question, but there is a new rule for the bonus rounds, which is there are 2 words I don't want to hear, and that's charter change. You get the idea. Okay, but what I'd like to do is hear from each of you, or any of you who want to respond to this, the idea of managing at time of crisis, whatever that might be. Yours was more of a long-term crisis, dealing with housing, dealing with decaying downtown. It could be the Woodlawn fire, it could be any number of issues, but as you define it, what challenges do you face and how difficult is it to govern at time of crisis?
Well, I recall Sunday morning, the head waterfowl from the water department came to the house with a bottle, and there was some kind of an amoeba or something in our waterworks, and we had to shut it down and boil water. And this same fellow was Public Works Commissioner, and the filters hadn't been changed or rebuilt in 50 or 60 years, and he voted against it. It was a really hard thing because the whole city was affected health-wise, and I don't recall exactly, but I know we fixed ones while we worked on the others. And it was quite a real difficult time because everybody drinks water.
Well, it's one of those things about city governance, isn't it? That people notice things like potholes, they don't notice things like infrastructure, water plants, sewer lines. These are things that they don't care about until they're broken. So, anybody else? What kind of crisis you want to face?
Well, I want to point out that we do have a commission form of government. But I never said we shouldn't make some changes. The mayor's office is a difficult office. For someone to take the job on a part-time basis and work full-time with the salary it's given, I had much less salary, but we're talking about today, there has to be some changes and revisions in that office. There has to be an accommodation for a mayor that works more than part-time, because you cannot expect someone elected today to give up their livelihood and take the job. So there has to be some revisions, some recognition that there is a change necessary in our government, so the mayor can be a full-time mayor and steer the course of government in a different way if they don't want to change the system, but they must compensate someone for being there 40 or 50 hours a week.
Because the burdens are more specific than accounts commissioner or public works?
Yes, and I think that recognition has to be made. I was an advocate for a commission form of government, but I didn't say that we don't make changes. And the changes that are necessary are to give the mayor an opportunity to work without hindrance, and to try to make a living is difficult when you have to work that way. There's conflicts of interest and other things. So we either have to compensate the mayor, change the term of office, and do some things that would be helpful to our city in a way without changing the government if that's the will of the people.
Can I make a quick comment? Since he keeps talking about his big salary. I was an attorney practicing, and so when I first went to the mayor's office, I started to keep track of the time. And my salary was $1,500 a year. But after the first month, I thought, this is crazy. I'm not gonna keep track of this, I don't wanna know. I agree with Ray on that one.
Somehow I don't think there'd be a big disagreement on the panel here over increasing the mayor's salary.
But Dale, I used to think that we were in violation of minimum wage laws.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree that we'd probably end up at negative numbers, even at the big salary of $14,500 today. It is a rigorous schedule. There's no doubt about it. There are days when I'm putting in 12, 15 hours a day. There are so many issues approaching our office, but also issues that we want to move forward. So it's clear that there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of conversations, lots of strategy sessions, lots of land use issues going on right now. And that has been clearly what I've been spending a lot of time on this year. And yet we have a lot of other things we need to accomplish. We did open a Code Blue shelter last winter, but we need a permanent home, and we're about to make that announcement soon. We do need to take care of all our folks here. This is a city with a diverse socioeconomic population, and we have homeless people coming into our office on a regular basis. We know them by first name. They're looking for help. And yet, then the next hour, top CEOs of companies are coming in to propose a project or a land use issue, and you work with everyone. And it involves a lot of hours in the day. And I guess if I could make one change, I'd add more hours to the day, because there's always more to do. You never finish the job, and there's always calls to be made. One of my favorite things that I have instituted this year is open office hours. And every other Friday, we just put 3 hours on my calendar and no appointment needed. You come in and you meet. And I have to say, some of the best innovative ideas have come because of those meetings. You never know who's going to show up with a great idea, and it's that tricky balance always of moving your initiative and ideas forward, but then being responsive to what you're hearing the community wants, and lots of great ideas in terms of small business support, starting accelerators here, being really the capital of the entrepreneurial hub. Sports tourism is something we're working hard on, so diversifying that economic portfolio is critical, and it's endless. And although we are in a very good position of our city, and the Saratoga brand is very strong, it's never to be taken for granted, ever. We can't be complacent, and we must move forward and always protect the good things that we have, whether it's preservation or horse racing, but also looking at other opportunities and options as well.
But I want to get back to the idea of crisis too, and how you operate in a crisis.
Like Mayor Klotz, I was in office for about 4 weeks, and in February there was that huge ice storm and power outage all across the Capital District, and that lasted for, in some cases, 3 weeks in different areas, pockets. So as soon as the power outage happened, I was really literally running around the city trying to make sure that senior citizens knew where they could go to find a warm shelter, that the nursing home and the hospital, that they had a generator. I was literally knocking on doors of places where I knew senior citizens lived, asking them if they needed help. And about 3 days into it, or maybe 2 days into it, and I hadn't been home really other than to sleep for about 3 or 4 hours, and then I was out again because it was the temperatures were dropping. It was like, 10 below or something like that. It was horrible. And a couple days into it, a friend of mine called and said, some radio personality on one of the stations was saying, "Where's the mayor of Saratoga Springs? So he said, you need to somehow get on the radio." And I thought, I'm busy. I'm trying to make sure that, people are warm and that they know where to go. But in fact, I think about that time, Senator Bruno and Assemblyman Tedisco were putting together a news conference, and the county was endlessly on the radio telling people where they could go for shelter and to get warm, and the Red Cross was involved, and So even though I knew that all the steps were being taken that we could take at that time to get the information out, the face of the mayor really needed to be there. So I went to where the news conference was being held. Senator Bruno was very welcoming. It was a joint news conference to really just get information out. But, you know, it was, I felt like I was doing more than I could have possibly been doing at the time, but still, the mayor needs to be out in the press. And I think there, you know, lies one of the responsibilities that you learn quickly is that you really are the face of the community. Even if you're just a figurehead, in reality, people want to be reassured that the mayor knows you know, what's going on, that they're informing the public about things like, you know, safe shelters and where they can go to get you know, a warm meal and things like that. That was really one of the biggest and major crises of my tenure, and it really did sort of solidify to me the importance of the role that I had to play.
Well, this is the idea of crisis to me. The reason I ask this is that, you know, you are ordinary people, excuse the expression, but ordinary people tasked suddenly with an extraordinary task. You're just, you know, one day you're walking down Broadway saying hi to friends, and suddenly you're walking down Broadway the next day with everybody confronting you with all these issues. So, time of crisis is a time when there's an opportunity to see how deep that goes, you know, how strong the metal, how people are able to step up in extraordinary times. So that's why I'm curious about the idea of crisis. Is there someone else who could talk about a particular time? Saratoga's not had any sort of...
Well, I mean, I can, and I want to get Ken's impression of this as well, Mayor Klotz, because I know he was mayor at the time. But on September 11th, I was finance commissioner, and Ken was in the hospital at the time. I can remember getting a phone call from my mother saying a plane went into the World Trade Center. And I remember turning on our little black and white TV in the bedroom, just to make you realize I'm not as young as I said I was. They didn't pay as much in the office, but and we didn't know at that time whether it was just a random, you know, whether it was even a jet at that time. And then as the morning progressed, I remember getting more information, and then I had to. I think it might have been my deputy who called, because again, the difficulty in our form of government is that we're all serving certain roles, but when the mayor is not able to serve his role, the finance commissioner becomes the acting mayor. So this was a moment of crisis, and I think Ken and I weren't able to communicate directly with one another. My deputy called and she said, you need to reach out to the Commissioner of Public Safety and find out, because some municipalities were shutting down government. And so I called Commissioner Curley at the time and I said, what do you want to do? And he said, I think we should stay open. I said, I think we should too. Rotary Club had reached out and we're trying to coordinate a vigil that evening at the East Side Rec. And our office was back and forth with the mayor's office. And I can remember being at the vigil, and I remember this, and I don't know if Karen Klotz remembers this or not, but I remember being at the vigil that night and sitting next to her, and I know she spoke at the vigil, and lighting candles with her. And you know, when you're involved in a political world, you sometimes it takes moments like that to realize that, you know, we were all part of a community, part of a country that was literally under siege at the time. And I remember a plane flying over, and everybody at the event took a noticeable kind of gasp, because that's how heightened the stress was. And so I know what it was like for me as finance commissioner, being in an uncertain role of, am I acting mayor, am I not, what do I do, how do I not step on the acting mayor's toes, but what is my role in trying to navigate that, and how it must have been for Mayor Klotz, who was obviously not there. He was in the hospital, but obviously wanting to serve as mayor. So I'd actually be curious to hear, because I don't think you and I have ever talked about that, what it was like to go through that.
I think if I could step back for a second, we do have structures in place at the city level, at the county level, at the state level to deal with crises of that sort. And at a certain point, it becomes clear, first of all, because you have drills on these sorts of things, you don't anticipate everything that comes up, but it's not as though you're caught dealing with it and inventing the wheel for the first time when there is that kind of a crisis. One of the things that one does as the city mayor is to turn to whether it's the public safety people, that if that's relevant, whether it's the county emergency response people and so forth, and you know to do that. I agree also with Valerie that the mayor is expected to be the face of the community's response, and that puts an extra burden on the mayor. Now, in my particular circumstances, I was in a coma in intensive care, and I did not find out about the events of September 11th until the following Thursday. So I really was not in a position to do anything, and I thank my wife particularly for stepping up, Mike, for what you did, because the community, I think, responded well and responded effectively, and I think that is it's a measure of pride to me, and it was sobering and humbling too. This community didn't depend on me. This community functions well by itself, and I saw that in many ways in my administration, how things would continue and work effectively with or without my intervention, but that certainly was a time when that point was made to me very vividly.
Mike, at any time during the ensuing days after that, did it ever cross your mind that I didn't sign up for this? This is not what I was here for.
No, and I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back, but I
mean a sense of such a burden.
No, it really did, and you know, Ken makes the point that in addition to having other members of the council, we all have administrative staff as well. So Ken had administrative assistant. He had. Did you have a deputy? Did we have a deputy? So he did not have a deputy. They had an administrative assistant, and so there are the administration level within government is there, you know, to support the elected official as well, and it becomes a level of what it boils down to is communication, because as Ken mentioned, everybody has a role to play, and certainly we knew that you had to work with the county, you had to work with the state, had to work with all levels of government to get a handle on what was happening, and Commissioner Curley, who was Commissioner of Public Safety at the time, was certainly very involved at that level as well. And your initial thought is, and the initial question being when my deputy called saying, you have to decide, somebody needs to decide whether or not we're going to shut down City Hall, and having that conversation in the early hours of that event, and we all have the power of hindsight now, in the early hours of those events, nobody really knew what was happening. You know, certainly for me personally, my wife personally, our primary concern was for our family, for our children, getting them out of the school where they were, getting them home, and then my focus turned to, I need to get down to City Hall because I need to kind of figure out what we're going to do and communicate with Commissioner Curley. And as I said, didn't have an ability to communicate with Ken, but I know Christine was communicating with his office. And then as the outreach occurred, where, you know, a separate entity being, I believe it was a Rotary Club that wanted to create this vigil, and that happened very quickly. I don't know if it was that night or the following night, I don't recall, but that witnessing the coming together of the community that night, which was completely separate from what government was doing, but that was probably my most poignant recollection of that moment, because at that point we weren't Republicans or Democrats, we weren't on opposite sides of the political aisle, we were Saratogians and we were Americans, and we were faced with a crisis that was immense, and none of us really knew what was happening, and that will bring people together more than anything else will. So that's really my common reflection, but I never felt that it was overwhelming, and not because of my abilities, but because I knew I was surrounded by a lot of people that had were very capable to do what they needed to do.
think when you have a crisis, it not only brings people together, but it also calls for action. So there is almost this request, this larger request that an action must happen. When Nancy Pitts died on the streets of Saratoga Springs, I called that a crisis. And nobody wants anybody to have to sleep outside in extreme weather conditions. So not only do we depend on our administrative and our city and county government support, but we also then turn to our partners in the community. And that's where you really are glad you've built these relationships up over the years, and you can call upon the nonprofits to partner with you to make things happen. And so I think going out of City Hall to accomplish a response to a crisis is also a way to go that also works and has been extremely successful.
So
Dale, you were the one that raised the question about response in a crisis, and I don't know if you were actually thinking of something that was a true national emergency like 9/11, but I will also add, sort of bringing this back down a little bit to the more ordinary, things are so busy in City Hall and things are so hectic, and it almost seems like every day is a crisis, that there are big issues to be decided and decisions to be made and so forth. And I think you do need to develop a sense of balance and an awareness that things come and go, and confidence that you're doing your best with whatever is before you, and then move forward and understand that tomorrow's a new day.
Well, and it's interesting, I mean, people talk about, no matter who the president, when you look at them when they go into office as they leave, and you look at the pictures, you can see such drastic change from that weight upon them. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that to some extent that weight is placed upon you as you go into office, and it can have that level of strength. I think, Scott, your hair was a different color when you started, right? It was brown back then. So you looked like you were starting to say something.
Yes, I was. We'll talk about national crisis and the points well taken. But when I was in office, particularly I believe it was in 2009, mid-year is when the city was abruptly denied our VLT money from New York State that we were expecting to receive. And that back then, according to our operational budget, that was about 10% of our budget that we lost literally overnight. And we already had the budget in place, of course, from the prior fall. But under our city charter, we're mandated to balance the budget. We can't carry deficits into the next year. So City Council, at that point, mid-year, was faced with a crisis on how do we cut about $3.5 million from the city budget now mid-year. So the cuts aren't even 10%. It's more than that because you're already half the year gone. And it was a very contentious time in our city, as I'm sure many of you recall. And the only part of the solution, at least, was to reduce some of the public safety personnel. And there was a lot of dissension, a lot of picketing by the unions to oppose that, cutting essential services, cutting back on firemen and policemen. We had a chief that left office in order to save some jobs, as he put it. It was a very contentious and a time of turmoil in our city on how to provide the essential services, even though you didn't have money. And how are we going to do that? And we had so many meetings on the issue, of course. We even moved the meetings up to the music hall on the 3rd floor to accommodate the picketers that wanted to come in with the big placards, and they were threatening, and kind of crossing lines to get into City Hall. It was a very difficult time for the City Council. But the point I'm trying to make, in essence, is to boil it down. We're elected to make tough decisions when we have to. And that's exactly what that was at that point in time. There wasn't anybody in the City Council that wanted to cut back on firemen or policemen. That was never the desire from the City Council, but we had to do that. And that, I think, was the first, I believe, in the history of the city. We're actually cutting back already personnel. Not, forget about not doing new hires. This is cutting existing personnel. And there were a lot of people that were coming to us screaming that their lives would be in danger, for example, on a fire level. if something occurred and there was enough personnel to really address the issues. So it wasn't just dollars and cents, it was public safety. And that really was an interesting time to be on the council. And as the mayor, of course, you're always the point person in terms of the media on these issues. And also under our city charter, as the mayor, it's your obligation to do the collective bargaining, the negotiations with the unions on their contracts. And the issue of cutting back on personnel directly impacted the ability to put new contracts in place. So it all kind of goes around and around and has this effect of influencing many issues that people don't think about. But certainly at that point in time, to lose that amount of money under our budget was, I think, a fiscal crisis for our city that forced us to do some things that really were unheard of up to that point in time. But on the other side of it, we also became more productive, I believe. So there's a benefit sometimes to making those tough decisions. The efficiencies that were put in place, doing more with less, the old cliche, but certainly did all of that back then because we had to do it. And again, as an elected official, it's not only our job, it's our obligation to do that. And it's not easy, it's not popular. You don't gain any popularity points on the street by doing these things. But as the mayor and as a city council in general, things that you do, you just must do sometimes because it's just the right thing to do, whether it's popular or not.
I was just going to comment on something you said earlier, Dale. We one day were walking down the street talking to our friends, and the next day we're elected officials. I don't think it's that simplistic. I think all of us here and anybody who sits on a city council in any town, city, the size, whatever, it doesn't matter. We all know all politics really is local. And I don't think any of us went into this not knowing that. And I think also that you don't go into a role representing any kind of a community, whether it's on a school board, whether it's being the chairman of a board, sitting on a nonprofit board, any of those kinds of things where you have responsibility. You have to have the Constitution where you feel confident that you can make decisions, that you're not going to fall apart in the face of a crisis. You wouldn't do something like this if you didn't have that confidence that you could move forward given whatever life is going to throw at you. You wouldn't be in a situation if you couldn't do that. And I think also just in the act of campaigning, if you want to call it that, which we do these days, to be elected to any kind of a city council or mayor or any representative role, you learn the issues. It's a tiring and consuming process in and of itself. So you're just by the fact that you're campaigning, whether it's you have an opponent or not, it's a rigorous role. So I think that in and of itself prepares you for what the issues are. It prepares you for long days. It prepares you to get out there and talk to the community if you're doing it. So it's not like one day where, I'm a mom taking my kids to a baseball game and the next day I'm the mayor. It really wasn't like that at all. I was involved with the Democratic Party. I was involved in nonprofits. I sat on boards. I felt like I knew what the issues are. And I'm not saying, me in general, but I think everybody is in that role. You don't take on a responsibility like representing your community lightly and not knowing, feeling inside that you have the capability of dealing with whatever's going to come to you.
I agree. I think running for office in general forces you out of your comfort zone. There's no question about it. And then you adapt. And just a story to reiterate what Mayor Johnson said. I remember when I was in office, there was and it went on for a period of time, there was a significant personnel issue with the public safety department. I won't go into detail about, but there was a personnel issue that occurred that wasn't getting resolved, and it ended up coming down to we had to go into executive session, and at that point this was all over the press at the time, and we had to go to executive session. We locked the door of the city council chambers, and we met, and we had to make a very difficult decision, and we did, and we voted to make a change in personnel, and when we were done, the vote was over. 5 men sitting in the room, And I don't know if it was Tony or one of our deputies came in and said there's about 50 reporters in the hallway with cameras and with microphones. And all the other guys just looked at me and go, well, we're just going to stay right here, Mike. Go on down the hallway. And that's literally what they did. They waited inside council chambers, locked the door behind whoever let me out, and walked out of the hallway, cheek, 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 and they locked the door behind me, and I was out in the hallway having to answer all these questions. So that's the difference between being mayor versus being, serving in another capacity. Because if the chips are down, they turn to you when you want to go and face the media.
They call it a feeding frenzy for a reason. And I understand all that. My point with the crisis question is simply that, Mike and Ken, you weren't expecting 2001, September 11th. You weren't expecting that to happen. You weren't expecting a massive financial crisis to take down the country. You weren't expecting to find homeless on the streets dead. Snowstorms, gas crisis. You weren't expecting that going in, and I think as people, how we respond to those helps define who we are. And that's the point I was trying to get at. So we're running out of time. I have a couple of questions I want to get to. So it's been kind of quiet over in this section here, so I'd like to go over here first. I'd love to hear what you would consider to be your proudest accomplishment in office.
Thanks for that question.
As long as it doesn't involve charter change.
I actually do have something that will touch home with the people that are here that I consider to be my greatest accomplishment. The piece of property right here was part of urban renewal and had been designated to be developed as apartments similar to what are over by High Rock Avenue. And it was an urban renewal parcel, and the area around was similar to what it is. There was a beer distributor and all the bars along Carolyn Street, that kind of stuff. And the deal fell through, and the developer was not able to complete the project. And the city was faced with that amount of territory, which is a pretty big parcel, and the storm sewer, which Ray was talking about, which, well, I think a truck can drive through it, perhaps a pickup truck, but it's a really big storm sewer, runs right through here. And so we're faced with, what are we going to do with this property? And simultaneously, Saratoga Public Library was looking for a new site. They decided we want a bigger library. And many people thought, we got to get that on the tax roll, we got to get those taxes. And some of us thought, no, this is like a gift. This piece of property would be a perfect place for the new public library. The library board thought that too. And there was going to be, we talked about it, and I have to say I had many heart-to-heart conversations with several members of the city council. And there was resistance. We got to keep that parking for public parking where it's going to be sited. It was not our project as such, because it's a school district project, not a city project. But by working together, we swapped ideas and talked about it, and we were able to put together a package where we could make this land available to the public library. And it required the passage of an $8 million bond issue in the school election. And they were able to pull it off. Once again, what everybody has mentioned, the citizens pulled together, and the citizens voted to pass that $8 million bond issue, which allowed the library to be built on this property. And there's a joint management of the parking lot. I'm not sure who runs it on a daily basis anymore, but I do at the time. And they were able to accommodate the storm sewer because they moved the building to the Henry Street side so that if the building is not on top of the storm sewer. And I believe this is the perfect place for the public library. Had gone out to the mall or to some abandoned warehouse someplace, it would have been bigger, but it would not have been in the center of the city. And I'm just real proud of the city for that.
I would say someone who moved here in 2000, and we had many cities to choose from. One major factor for us was the fact this community did indeed spend that money to build this facility. It was a very important factor for us. So thank you for that. Mr. Connolly was very important today, so this is your chance to really shine.
Back when I was in office, one day Commissioner McTighe came in and said we had a potential major problem on the East Avenue with the water and sewer line. He said the thing is leaking, it's going to be a major problem, and I said, well, why don't you go up and talk to the racetrack, and they're the one that using that particular line and so on. And he said, well, I have, but I can't seem to get any answers out of them. They say it's in the city property, too bad, that type of thing. So he said, well, you're looking at me, what do you want me to do? He said, you go up and talk to him. You're a big shot and all this and that. Okay. So I got an appointment with the guy in charge, and went up, and he started to talk with me, and he said, yeah, I remember when the commissioner came in, but he said, that's your water problem, not ours. And I said, well, let me kind of create a scenario. I said, it's Traverse City, and there's 30,000 people there. And they go into the John and flush it, and it all explodes out there in the city. Now, what's going to happen? He looked at me and he says, I think we both have a problem. No, I said, you have the problem. He said, well, how much do you need? And I said, well, how about 200,000? And he said, 200,000? I said, yeah. And you want me to go back and talk to the commissioner? He might give a higher amount. He said, no, we'll go with 200,000. Which I did, but when I met with Commissioner McTighe, he said, how much did you get? And I said, well, how much do you think I should have gotten? And he said, 250,000. I said, that's Commissioner McTighe. But, you know, the office, there's a lot of these incidents that pop up, and there's things that have to be done. But one of the great things, again, when I was mayor and so on, I think each of the people that are here, is that the office is set up so that you really go out into the community and you talk to people. You don't expect them to come in all the time. And I think that's different than some of the other forms of government. They're more hierarchical, that type of thing. I think we sometimes just go out and see if we can get it done face to face. And I think, at least from my perspective, and I think most of the people here, if not all of them, that's what they were great at too. And I want to salute everybody that's here. And it's always fun too to sit down and not hear too much of Democrat and Republican. That we were all mayors, and I salute each of you.
Wow, we should end there. But I'm not that smart. So why don't we come over, Mr. Murphy? How about you? Your greatest accomplishment. Microphone, please.
I can't think of one particular thing. I think it was a combination of some of the things I've alluded to. The sidewalks for the high school, the annexation of Greenfield for Skidmore, McDonald's. It's a cumulative. You have so many things. And one thing that was prevalent when I took office was there was an old guard, and people who didn't pay their taxes and had friends at City Hall didn't pay them. And I happened to come across this, and I picked 3 places: a hotel on South Broadway, the former Newman's Lake House, which was a go-go place, and a house over on the west side. And I remember telling Dave Waite, who was my city attorney, I said, I want to padlock Newman's Lake House on Friday afternoon. And he said, you can't do it. I said, we're going to do it. And we did it. And they sued us, we countersued. And after about 3 weeks, Sal Bombas, who represented the go-go place, came up with a check for $28,389. So the people in the finance office told me, it's amazing. People are coming in paying these taxes. They're afraid the crazy mayor's going to lock their house. So there really isn't one thing. It's just you get to the office, you deal what's there, and you're trying to represent the people, and you do what you think is right. And one item that hasn't been mentioned Mayor Yepsen and I were talking about it, is you have to deal with the local newspaper and the editor of the paper, who sometimes are a pain. I know Ray remembers Fred Eaton. When he was editor, Fred thought he was God. And myself being young, he would put in the boy mayor again. So I told Fred is dead now, so I can tell us. What I did is I changed anything the city was going to release, I released when it would go to the Gazette first. So it was old news when he got it. And I became very friendly with then reporter Dick Brooks. And so finally, Fred Eaton, after about 2 weeks, called me up and said, Jim, I want to talk to you. And I said, what about? And he said, well, you know, come over here. I said, no, you come over here. So we entered into a truce because he, you know, I wouldn't do what he wanted, he would do what I wanted. So we agreed to do something that we could both run with.
I will point out that I'm sure Mayor Yepsen would never say anything bad about the media well. just so
you had to deal with it.
So, am I correct? Am I accurate in this, that you're the only one up here who has a building named after you?
Well, yeah, because I put the money out.
Works well. Naming rights.
I put the financing together with opposition from a great man of the city, and we worked it out, and it was a 10-year bonding situation. I made no money on it. It was a nonprofit organization, but we got that housing through Section 8 set aside, and people have a place to live that is a very good place. And I put my name down to finance it. So they named it after me because I did the work and with another committee of people, and worked out well.
I suspect that's not your proudest moment, though.
Well, my proudest moment is being elected to the city of, mayor of the city of Saratoga Springs, which is a great honor. And it's great to serve, and you must give everyone on this dais credit for a lot of work and nonprofit work for them. And it's hard to be a public official, but I loved every moment of it. And I thought it was a great honor to be mayor. And I think this city is a marvelous city. And it's a great satisfaction to be able to serve.
And what office are you running for now?
I am not.
You heard it here first.
So I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Klotz.
Well, so much happened in those 4 years, but a couple of things I would point to are the 2001 comprehensive plan, which I think has served the city well since it was agreed to and implemented to strengthen downtown and preserve the rural areas of the town. The preservation of the Universal Baptist Church, which I think was a huge preservation accomplishment, and the beginning of the development of Beekman Street, which I think has been an ongoing success story in the last decade.
I love that no one has just one. I mean, it speaks well of administration that there's so many things.
Well, and I would add that so much of what we do when we're in office builds upon what's been done prior to us being in office, and I think that's important to acknowledge that. As I said, I served as finance commissioner. I think two of my proudest accomplishments while in office in general, one is finance commissioner and one is mayor. When I first came in as finance commissioner, I had looked at what was then called the mini mall, which was on the west side of Broadway, and it was, from urban renewal, it was a concrete, basically a concrete mall that had been created that was a passageway through from the Woodlawn Avenue parking lot down to Broadway. And I approached my fellow council members and said, would you be opposed to me going forward and trying to get that property infilled with building? And they said, sure, go at it, have a ball, young buck, have fun. And so I began a journey of a lot of groups coming in to see me, voicing either their agreement or disagreement with it happening, and then if it happened, certain things that needed to be included if it were to happen. And part of the RFP that we put in place, it's now where Putnam Market and Putnam Wine is now, which I think has become just a focal point for downtown, and allows people as they're walking down the west side of Broadway to continue down even further, whereas in those days people would literally stop and turn around. The part of the RFP, the request for proposal, was that we were going to make a walkway that was heated and well lit so that we could allow there to be continued access from Woodlawn down to Broadway. And now, going forward with the building under Mayor Johnson of that parking facility, I think that's become even more important, that now there continues to be this feeder down to Broadway. So we got it back on the tax rolls, and we were able to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish to continue to have access. I did have Mrs. Klotz come to, I won't identify her, but I had Mrs. Klotz come to the council meeting, and literally, and I don't mean this to make fun of her, but she literally was in tears, thinking that we were going to take away the Santa's shop, because that's where it was in the mini mall, and actually worked with the developer to create a permanent place for what is now, we all know, at Santa's Workshop, and where the Christmas tree is there. So you go through a lot of issues when you try to move forward and lead. So I'm very proud of that. As mayor at the time, when I was in office, there was a $5 million open space bond act that had been passed by the community, and we purchased well over 100 acres. But the one that I'm particularly proud of is the waterfront parcel. And I think in today's newspaper, through subsequent administrations, we are now at the point where we're going to be breaking ground on creating this wonderful park. And myself, as well as all of my fellow council members, really worked hard to negotiate that sale, that contract. And our intention at the time was, we knew that it was the only access to Saratoga Lake in the city of Saratoga Springs. We knew it was a valuable purchase and hoped that someday what would happen is what's happening. So everybody before us and everybody after us, we all build upon each other's legacies, and I think that, again, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Conservative, Independent, that's the most important takeaway, is that we're all Saratogians. All of us that served in office felt that we were doing what was in the best interest of the community, and I think our community is better off for it. Thank you.
Would you take anything away today, the important messages that Michael Lenz saved Christmas?
Yeah. I'm announcing that the building on the corner of Broadway and Lake will now officially be named the Lenz Building.
Well, it's 2 o'clock, so I don't want to keep people here indefinitely and unduly. Are we?
But no, we're proudest moment, yes, absolutely.
Right. Well, I absolutely agree that, when you take office, you inherit from your predecessor both the good and the bad. And the waterfront property was absolutely one of those great legacies that, for generations to come, we hope, and I know that Mayor Yepsen is going to make sure that that becomes a reality very quickly. And, it took now 4 administrations to hopefully make that come true. In talking to one of the crises that Mayor Johnson experienced, one of the things that I think maybe not one of my proudest moments, because I in fact resisted it for several months, was the expansion of the Racino. And when it came to a reality, I embraced it as part of our community and found that there was some great discrepancies in how money was going to be allotted to communities that housed one of these racinos. And it was brought to my attention that the legislation was written originally because those facilities were downstate. And so the legislation on how the funding was going to be dispersed to communities that housed a racino was written to benefit the most poorer economically communities. So the stipulation in the way the law was written was that any community that housed a racino would get a percentage based on the number of children that they had who were getting free hot lunches. And in essence, that excluded Saratoga Springs from getting any benefits back from the state for housing a racino. So unlike, I think kind of contrary to public opinion, the city council at that time really did work together at several critical points, and that was one of them. We all got together and we said this is not fair. It shouldn't matter whether or not we're an impoverished community or we're a wealthy community or in between. If we're going to house a racino, we should benefit from the fact that we're putting public safety, that we have to build infrastructure, that our roads, we have to maintain the roads, deal with all the ethical issues and social issues that go along with housing one of these facilities. So we all, got our figures together. We all worked together to put together a concise and explicit demand, basically, to the state on what we wanted. And it really kind of was mind-boggling that some of our state representatives didn't even realize the language was written that way. And of course, all of our representatives who were hoping to get reelected by the Saratoga Springs voters jumped on the bandwagon. And while it's not written in stone, and in fact, money is fungible, and there's no guarantee from one year to the next, as Mayor Johnson experienced it, if we hadn't gone down and gotten they had to redo the legislation. They had to pass a new law in how they were going to disperse funds to communities. So I really think that was an example of the city council at that time working together and making our demands well known. So it was, I think, a very positive thing, even though from year to year we have to really be vigilant in demanding that we get that money for our city.
I'm not trying to evade the question, but it's really hard to point to one specific thing. Looking back on my 6 years as being the honor of serving as your mayor, I take pride in the fact that my administration was able to move a lot of projects forward that had been dormant prior to my taking office. I'll name a few of them for you. The most obvious one is the recreation center over near the terrace. It had been talked about for over 16 years by the time I took office. Feasibility studies went back that far. But the city council prior to my administration had bonded it and so on and so forth, but we weren't building it. And it's no secret to those in the room that we were able to move that not only forward and get it done, but put it in the city. Much like this library is a great location, as Mayor Riley mentioned a moment ago, because in order to have a good facility, it's not enough to be a good facility, you have to be able to get to it. And that was the problem I had with the whole rec center back then, being out of town. So I'm very proud that that is able to come forward and really serve the youth of our community, which we know are our future leaders. You can't make any better investment than the youth of your community. Along with that, the parking garage that was referenced earlier on Woodlawn Avenue, a 500-spot parking facility. That was the first public-private partnership that we joined with downtown merchants, the Chamber of Commerce, the Special Assessment District in particular, to come forward, have a piece of the action, some stake in the game, and help us build this thing, because we all know we needed it and certainly still need it. I go there many times when I come downtown, when I do drive downtown, which is very often. I'm a good walker around town based on where I live, but basically I go through that garage. It is so well used, and that is a huge benefit to our downtown community, bringing dollars and cents into not only their coffers, but city coffers each and every year. The Waterfront Park, I'm very happy to read and learn that Valerie Yepsen is moving that forward yet again. When I took office, that was padlocked. Not any fault of Mayor Keehn, just the money wasn't there was no plan in place. We developed a really great comprehensive master plan of developing that park, and that's moving forward now at a time when we have the money to do it. So I'm proud of all these things for our community. And healthcare savings, I mean, there's no secret that I was not an easy negotiator with the union contracts, but I'm very proud of the fact that we will again move something forward that's been long overlooked. That's healthcare savings that could be actually achieved. And that's a savings to the city each and every year as you go forward. So all these things are together, and I kind of look at them as taking action, if you will, on things that had long been discussed in our city or needed in our city. And I'm proud of my staff, small staff at that, in my administration for playing our role and helping it happen, along with the help from many other people, of course. And one final comment, as Mayor Watkin did mention, I think that all of us here today on the panel probably our proudest moments. We're probably the first election night that we were elected mayor. And I like certainly share that sentiment and echo those remarks. Thank you.
Mayor Yepsen, I'm sorry about the time.
Yes. That's okay, I have another year and a half, so.
But so you're relatively new tenure, but, I'm sorry, I was just kidding.
Great.
You get another couple minutes, please. So, but I'm curious, what, with so much ahead of you, what you would consider this one?
Right, so clearly a few months on the job, but we have tackled a number of very, very challenging and difficult issues. So I want to thank my former mayors for setting up the waterfront park. One thing that we have done was work with the state parks to make sure that those grants are still there. So we toned down the plan just a touch, but we're groundbreaking on Monday and we're staying within budget. So I'm really proud of that, and thank you all. And of course, we'd love to see you all there on Monday for the groundbreaking. It's going to be a great project, and it's the first real public access to the lake. Also, as county supervisor, we got matching funds to purchase 5 acres on the Kairos. That's also been closed now over the last month. So we officially own that property, which is going to be a preserve on the Kairos, which gives public access to the Kairos too. So the whole waterway is now being opened up to the public, which is very exciting. I have to say, in the short few months that I've had with the casino issue, the Racino expansion, and several other big projects coming before the public, the citizens have once again come through in terms of really insisting that they become a part of the process. So we opened up, from my office, a process that would have been closed to the public. On the Racino expansion, we opened it up and forced it to be a public process, and I'm very proud of that. We also did the same with the city center parking garage, which is under consideration now. It's not going to be a closed room deal. It's going to be a very open public process that the public will have plenty of opportunity to comment on, and you will help literally form the final outcome. In regards to my proudest moment, I suppose, of course, getting elected is what I would echo, but also forming Sustainable Saratoga. This is something that started as a grassroots organization as supervisor, but now I'm finding that the talent and the amazing skills that come through in this group for this city's future, I'm using all the time as mayor. And they are not only looking at environmental sustainability, but economic sustainability, which is a critical point in our history right now. We must respect the past, but we have to plan for the future and make sure our economics are strong. Thank you.
Well, I will say that I would love to keep going for a couple more hours, but we're out of time. But I want to give you my heartfelt thanks for all of you being here and being a part of this. I'm very grateful. And to all of you for coming, thank you for coming. Can we get a picture of everybody before you go?
I know. This is good. What? Still want to go? Okay, thank you.